Amelia was used to packing her husband's things, deftly arranging the most necessary items in the sections of the suitcase. He was a truck driver, and she took his frequent departures calmly and only asked him to call more often so that she would be less worried in his absence. Damon left and Amelia got busy with household chores, especially since there had been a lot of them lately. Hearing a knock at the door, the woman looked out the window and grudgingly grimaced. It was Mrs. Johnson again, the elderly woman who knew all the gossip going on in the neighborhood. Amelia herself had never been interested in such news, but sometimes she just had to listen to it while she was taking orders for repairs or tailoring. Amelia had loved sewing since she was a child, and now she willingly did the work, but some people were too intrusive and inconsiderate, like Mrs. Johnson, for example, and that lady had already started a conversation. "Hello, Amelia. How are you? Did you send your husband on a business trip again?" "Oh, honey, all this can lead to unfortunate consequences. You will then cry." "What are you talking about, Mrs. Johnson?" "I trust my husband. We love each other. Amelia, I've lived a long time. I've seen everything, and how men have affairs, and how they live double lives. What can I say? My late husband was like that himself." Soon Mrs. Johnson left, but the uneasy feeling in Amelia's soul remained. Amelia and Damon had only been married for 3 years. He was older than her, but that did not stop them from falling in love and getting married. However, the age difference was not a problem. They lived in Damon's large house and were quite happy, except for the fact that they were unable to have children. The phone call interrupted Amelia's thoughts. She answered, and the person on the other end spoke quickly. Amelia responded in the affirmative and then just stood there and listened, unable to believe her ears. Almost a week later, Damon returned home. He brought a gift for his wife, as he always did, and expected her to come out and greet him, kiss him, tell him the news, and ask about his trip. But no one came out of the house. Amelia was gone. Her phone was silent. By evening, Damon became worried and went to his neighbors, but they didn't know anything. He called relatives and friends, but no one had seen Amelia for a long time. Damon didn't know what to do. The next morning, he went to the police, but they advised him to wait patiently. And if she was not back in 2 days, they would take a report and start a search. But what does it mean to wait quietly? Damon couldn't do that. He had already been everywhere, called hospitals and morgues, and there was no sign of her. Amelia was missing. However, a day later she came back. But not alone. She was with a boy about 5 years old. Damon stood and watched as they walked down to the house. He could physically feel the excitement letting go, but the anger was rising. He was angry that she was walking along like nothing had happened while he was going crazy. Instead of greeting her, he asked, "Well, what's that supposed to mean?" She answered to his tone, "Damon, I want you to meet Jaden. He is your son." The black-haired boy looked curiously at the angry man, then stepped back and hid behind Amelia. "Why don't you let us in the house, and we can talk there? Jaden is tired and hungry. It's a long drive. He needs to sleep." Damon didn't understand anything and asked again who the boy was. "It is your son, yours, and Penelope's." "Do you remember Penelope?" Yes, he remembered her. They had been friends since childhood, and she had always wanted him to like her. She imposed her friendship, showed her attention, but Damon didn't reciprocate. He liked other girls, and then Penelope left. Where she was and what became of her he did not know, and was not interested. But one day, while Damon was driving to a small town, he saw that a new cafe and a big truck stop had opened. It was just about time for him to rest, and he decided to stop. Ordering at the cafe, he looked up at the waitress and recognized her. "Penelope!" She was smiling at him. It turned out that Penelope got married, but was widowed a year ago. Now, she worked in this cafe and lived in the town. It just so happened that he stayed with her that night. It was the only night he ever saw Penelope. He berated himself for that weakness, but what was done? And now a child. It could have been true. But how had Amelia found out about it? Where was Penelope herself? And why was her son here now? When Jaden fell asleep, Amelia answered all the questions that plagued her husband. Penelope's mother-in-law, Mrs. Brown, had called. "She had your home number. She wanted to talk to you, but I told her that you were out and asked if there was anything I could do to help. And she told me that Penelope had a baby boy after her son died, and that you were the father. She couldn't forgive her for a long time, but then she put up with it because Jaden was growing up so cute. Mrs. Brown asked me very much to come, so I did. The elderly woman met me well, introduced me to Jaden, and then, after sending him off to play, she told me why she had called me. One day, Mrs. Brown said I asked Penelope who Jaden's father was. I used to think that she didn't know herself, but she knew. She loved your Damon since childhood, and when my son died without leaving her children, she despaired. I understand her as a woman. She's tired of being alone, and then she met your Damon again. So she decided to get pregnant by him. She wasn't gonna tell anyone about Jaden. She wanted to raise him herself, so Damon wouldn't know anything. Anyway, I made up with her after this confession. Mrs. Brown sighed. But her motherly happiness did not last long. A drunk driver sat behind the wheel. Penelope and Jaden were just returning from the store. She saw a truck rushing at them and just had time to forcibly throw Jaden aside, but she went straight under the wheels. Since then, Jaden has not said a word. He was terrified. Doctors can't do anything. He just keeps quiet. For more than a year, my grandson and I lived together. And now I feel that I am weakening every day. So I decided to find Jaden's father. A phone number and address written on a piece of paper were in Penelope's documents. Therefore I called. Stay with us for the night. Then go to your husband, talk everything over, and then please let me know what you both decided. Only if you are going to hurt the boy, you'd better tell me right away. Then I will not give him to you. Amelia was quiet, looking intently at her husband, and then she continued. Just imagine that night she was gone. I heard wheezing, so I called an ambulance. They came, but there was nothing they could do. Then there was the funeral. There was no one to bury Mrs. Brown, so the neighbors and I did it all. And so I came back only now. Damon silently digested all the information that his wife poured out to him and then asked, "Do you realize what a burden you are placing on yourself?" I mean, practically live in the truck. You'll have to look after him by yourself. Amelia nodded. It had been a very difficult year for them. It turned out that registering a child was not easy at all, even if you were his father. Damon had to live not in the trips now, but in the corridors of the custody offices. And when everything seemed to be coming to an end, some new circumstance would come up that required an urgent decision. Now he also had to look for a job. The man began to snap at his son and wife. She was spending a lot of her time with the child and could not always give Damon her attention. He became angry and blamed everything on Amelia, who had imposed Jaden on them, and now their whole life had gone wrong. At some point, the man started drinking, which was very disturbing to Amelia. Jaden would often hide behind Amelia or sit in his room and play quietly with his toys. One day, Damon's friend came to visit. The man stopped the truck in front of the house exactly at the moment when Jaden was playing in the garden. With eyes widened with horror, the boy saw Damon heading towards the huge vehicle. He jumped to his feet, rushed to his father, and shouted, frightened and protesting, "Daddy!" and then pushed him away from the truck, covering the adult man with himself and expecting that the terrible, huge vehicle was about to come upon them both. Damon instantly understood and picked his son up in his arms, kissing and shaking him. "What did you say, son? What did you say?" Before Damon realized it, he called the boy son for the first time. The boy stroked him on the head and said, "Daddy, Daddy, don't be afraid. I'm here." Damon's friend, stunned and confused, looked silently at the father and son, understanding that something very good was happening between them now, and that he should not interfere with it. In the evening, they all sat together at the big festive table. Amelia already knew that a friend had come and brought good news. Damon had not only been asked to come back, but had also been offered a brand new truck. Jaden looked at his father and Amelia with all his eyes and rejoiced with them, and she leaned over to the boy and asked, "Jaden, may you call me Mom?" "Of course, Mommy," Jaden sobbed and snuggled up to her. "That's good, Sonny," said Amelia, and suddenly she laughed merrily. "Otherwise, it wouldn't be right if one son would call me Amelia, and the other would call me Mom." It could be confusing that way. Damon stared at his wife, and she nodded embarrassedly. So, Happiness, which had entered their home one day, decided to stay with them forever.